All right. We're going to take a little detour tonight, short detour, and we had some discussion on Ezekiel, the vision of the temple in Ezekiel as we look at John's vision, um, and I got off track. Of course, I wasn't expecting that, but do not ever not ask a question just because I'm not expecting it and I might have to scramble. Do not ever not ask a question. Always ask questions. If I have to scramble, well, you'll get that side again. Um, what I fell into um, last night was a literalist interpretation of Ezekiel. These last 7 chapters, or I'm sorry, last 8 chapters in Ezekiel. That was a literalist translation, and that at that point was my belief of Ezekiel, and I fell into that because that was my training at that point. Um, and that is a fairly common interpretation of Ezekiel. That's not like that's off on left field. This is a fairly common, especially in evangelical circles. That's a fairly common interpretation of Ezekiel. Now that I went back and looked again and read back up on some things, I said, "Oh my goodness, I told him that." So understand that that interpretation is a standard Protestant interpretation, and to sum it up, what that interpretation takes a very literal look at it, at Ezekiel as he saw the temple before him, the glimpse that God gave him of this temple, and the angelic. Remember, there was an angelic guide there with him. Um, let's see if I can find it real quick. City brought down, city, the Lord was upon me and brought me down, and he brought me there. When he brought me there, behold, there was a man whose appearance was like bronze, with a linen cord and a measuring reed in his hand. That's chapter 40, verse 3. So we're dealing with an angelic um, companion here to give Ezekiel a tour of this temple vision and the vision of there's three real parts of it. It's the actual temple that Ezekiel sees, and then there are he's taken by the messenger into a review of all the rules concerning this entry and exit into this new temple that he's seeing. And then the last few chapters, 47 through 48, are a look at the proportion that this new Jerusalem, new temple, is given back to the tribes of Israel. Now, like I said, this is a literalist interpretation that I gave you, so be aware of that. Um, and let me go back to the timeline that we're dealing with here. Remember, this is Ezekiel and Daniel and Jeremiah were all contemporary prophets, and they were prophesying. Uh, all three of them were prophesying from Babylon at one point in time or another. So we're dealing with the temple. The first temple has been destroyed, or well, not completely destroyed in the early prophecies of Ezekiel and Daniel and Jeremiah. But Babylon, remember, Babylon took over uh, the promised land in steps, and they brought people in waves out of Jerusalem and into Babylon. So it wasn't a here we come, we're going to take over the city and then take everybody back like the northern kingdom. This was a gradual um, taking apart of the Jerusalem and the temple. So this we don't have a temple now in Jerusalem. So Ezekiel is seeing this vision of something that is no longer there. Now the general literalist view is that this is a vision of the temple that is going to be in the millennial, the physical, earthly millennial reign. When Jesus returns, he's going to rule for 1,000 years on the earth here in a literal um, earthly kingdom. And we'll get to that's in Ezekiel. That's in Revelation. We'll talk about that when we hit it. But that when we hit that, we're going to look back here too, because the literalists believe that that is a that is going to happen. The temple is going to be rebuilt in accordance with these instructions that we see in Ezekiel. The the sacrifices will begin again in the literalist view, and the priesthood will be there to officiate. And you see that in those last in those middle chapters, chapter 40 through 46. You see that in the rules pertaining to these um, sacrifices. So that's a literalist view, and they think that that's going to be. Now, when I say they think, that's not that's not um, denigrating that belief, because that's a very popular belief, and it's not, and that was my belief for a long time. So
Well,
I'm
well,
just saying they believe in terms of that's their belief.
well, Norm, that would bring back. I mean, that don't mean they're going to be bringing back sacrifices and animals and everything else. I mean, that's just
Now the literalists believe that the sacrifices will start again, and
I don't know how they could think that when Jesus sacrificed
me
himself on
too.
the cross. And
that's
secondly, they're talking about
Well,
the Zadok priest being make sure they have certain clothes so they don't sweat, and
yep.
then they
Hmm.
can't take wives to themselves. There's no taking of wives in heaven.
Yep.
Jesus said that himself.
Yep.
So I don't know how they can even look at it that way.
And that is one of the weaknesses of the literalist view, is that they kind of stretch that sacrifice, and they've got some decent arguments. They say that the sacrifices are not considered by God to be an atonement. It is a more like a sacrificial offering that we would make in terms of money, or
But
when we bring.
that's completely wrong, though.
Yeah,
That's exactly what it was for.
yeah,
That's what they wrote in Leviticus. It was an atonement.
yep, I know, I know, but
So that I don't see how they can biblically say that.
yeah, and
me either.
that's, like I said, that's one of the weaknesses of the literalist view. Um, if we and and honest to goodness, that's what I believed that for a long time, uh, and it is a very persuasive argument, and it's not necessarily a to listen to their argument, and I reviewed it a little bit. I can't talk about it in depth because I just my memory is not that good. But they have a very persuasive view, is that after Jesus came back, they keep the sacrifices as a memorial to remember the times when they were real. So it's a very persuasive argument. It's a very persuasive argument. But as Jeff and Geraldine have said, it doesn't really hold water if you're going to believe the Levitical reason for a sacrifice. It kind of falls apart there. So that is that's the literalist view of this. Most, well, no, let me not say most. An alternative view, which is more along the lines of I think where we're going to settle down, is that this is more this prophecy is more a remembrance of the the temple and how it should be, not that it's going to be, but how it could be, how it should have been, how it should have been. The When you look at the metrics that they present, um, when you talk about, and those of you that read it, there's a lot of measuring going on here. But this is a size comparison of the original tabernacle in the wilderness, the tent. This is the first temple. This is Solomon's temple. These are drawn to scale. This is Herod's temple. This is the one that was during Jesus' time, the second temple. And this is a description of Ezekiel's temple that he saw. It's a lot bigger. It's a lot bigger, and the proportions of it are just odd. It's got some very odd rooms in it. And one thing that it doesn't have is, well, two things that it doesn't have, very important, is they don't have a whole lot of height measurements. They got one or two, but they don't have a lot of how high is the wall. And also they don't have a roof. There's no roof described on the temple. So that's what leads a lot of folks to believe that this is more or less a a figurative reconstruction, a figurative reminder of the rules of the temple, and a reminder of the land as it is divided amongst the tribes. It's sort of as Anthony says, it's sort of a flannel graph kind of lesson here. Because remember, at this time, they don't have Torah anymore. Once the temple was destroyed, they don't have the Torah anymore. So it's important that prophets like Daniel and like Ezekiel and like Jeremiah remind them of the Torah and the prophets speaking directly about that so that they don't forget. And a lot of them didn't forget, especially Daniel and his bunch. They did not forget. They did not forget the Old Testament. So I'm going to lean more towards this is more or less a figurative redrawing of the temple just to remind the people how magnificent it was and how magnificent it could be. It reminds them the purpose of the sacrifices and how intricate those were. And also it reminds them that there were 12 tribes. Remember, the northern kingdom has been gone for a while. There were 12 tribes, and they all had a proportion of the land. So falling on that middle ground, that's where I think that we will leave it at. does anybody have any questions on this sidetrack that we've got of Ezekiel's vision?
Do you think it could be something that they'll use? Not that it is, but that they would use it for the building of the third temple?
The literalist, yeah, they're probably gonna now. If you notice,
There's a uncanny amount of Christians that
oh
would
yeah,
like to see the third temple raised.
that's right. But one of the big problems is
That's
that
the
was
Antichrist temple, though.
that was Herod's temple. This thing is huge. So, but a person that believes the literal interpretation of this is going to have to come up with some serious building materials because it is at least 3-4 times the size of Herod's temple, which if you've seen the footprint on the mount on Moriah there, where the Dome of the Rock is, Herod's temple was pretty big, and it took up a good amount of space. How they're going to build something that size, I don't know. But yeah, Jeff, you're right. The Ezekiel description is going to probably pay, especially those Christians that are involved in the rebuilding. It's probably going to be a big part of that plan that they've got. So let's all keep our eyes on Jerusalem because things are going to happen there and probably happen pretty quick. All right, other questions or discussion? So you got a dose of literal interpretation of Ezekiel. Ezekiel is, and especially that last part of Ezekiel, that book makes Revelation look a little easier. Ezekiel is a different animal when it comes to prophecy. It is a tough book to deal with, and especially, like I said, those last chapters describing the the new temple that Ezekiel saw. That is a that is a very difficult part. In fact, several of the commentators called that the most difficult interpretation um, piece of the whole Bible. It makes like I said, it makes Revelation look easy. So, and like I said, I'm going to dust off some of my old Ezekiel stuff and get back in because that Ezekiel is a challenge. So, any other questions? And I'm gonna pay attention to what I'm saying because I fell back into some old teachings there and probably should have studied a little bit more before I said them, but I'm putting it straight now. That was a literalist interpretation of Ezekiel, and it does, as Jeff and Geraldine reminded us, it does have some problems with those sacrifices, especially if you're going to try and put it into the area of the 1,000-year millennial reign of Jesus when he returns. So yeah, there's some serious problems, and it takes some it takes some uh, um, active interpretation, shall we say? So let's if we don't have any other discussion, let's re get back into Revelation, and we left last week in the fourth chapter. We're going to go back to John's um, John's companion, who uh, we're calling God or God of Israel, because the descriptions of him are he's describing the Father from the Old Testament, and he's describing what looks like the Son in the descriptions that we get. One or two of them from the Old Testament, but mostly from the New. So we're starting to see the Trinity here in Revelation, where the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit are ichad. They're one. They are um, they are one. They're one Godhead in three persons. So I'm just going to start back with the fourth chapter. I'm going to read on down that first paragraph, and we'll catch up. So, in the fourth chapter of Revelation, starting at verse 1, after this, and that's after everything that came before, I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." Now remember, the God was standing there with John as he dictates, as John sees the first vision of the seven menorahs and the seven stars. And now God is coming back to John, speaking from behind him, and in that same voice, come up here and I will show you. At once I was in spirit. Remember that "the" is not there in the Greek. So at once I was in spirit, and behold, a throne stood in heaven, with one seated on the throne, and he who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian, and around the throne was a rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald. Around the throne were 24 thrones. Seated on the thrones were 24 elders, clothed in white garments, with golden crowns on their head. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and before the throne were burning 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne there was, as it were, a sea of glass like crystal. So this is a very typical prophetic vision that they're in the throne room of God, in the heavenly council, in the throne room before the throne. And this should immediately remind us of Daniel chapter 7, where Daniel saw God seated in the midst of the heavenly host. It's we're almost looking at a rerun of what Daniel saw, and that's going to come back. Daniel, like I said, Daniel is very important to Revelation, and we're seeing the same kind of thing in Daniel repeated in Revelation, but in a lot more detail. So it's just like we were seeing in Daniel chapter 7, and you can go back and read that again. That's a critically important chapter. We're going to see that chapter 7 in Daniel come up again and again. But we see the Ancient of Days. We see that figure sitting on the throne, and it mentioned that there was an appearance of jasper and carnelian. And anytime you see or hear in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, but here it is in the New Testament, you hear precious stones or even semi-precious stones mentioned, take note of them, because the tribes of Israel were represented by 12 semi-precious and precious stones, and the representation came from the chief priest's breastplate that he wore when he was in his official dress. He had a gold breastplate, and on there were encrusted 12 stones representing the 12 tribes, and there are 3 across and 4 down. each one of them representing a tribe. And when we look at the jasper and carnelian here, we're reminded that, and each one of them had the name of the tribe engraved on them, so we know exactly what they were. The jasper, the jasper was represented the the youngest tribe, um, Benjamin, and then carnelian was the oldest, Reuben. So we have basically here from the first to the last again another repetition of that first and last. So we have the um, the representation of the 12 tribes right there from Reuben to Benjamin um, in the throne, and then around the throne was a rainbow with the appearance of an emerald. The emerald was the tribe of Judah. So here we have a vivid picture of the throne and God seated on the throne in the throne room with a representation of the carnelian and jasper symbolizing the 12 tribes of his chosen people. Plus around the throne is this rainbow that's going to remind us of Genesis, and also that rainbow was like emerald, which is the 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 Son of God just enclosing the whole picture there. So we have the 24 thrones now, and seated on the throne with 24 elders. Two interpretations of that are decent uh, to help us understand that. And I think it was Jeff mentioned the the uh, the 24 thrones. One perfectly good translation Jeff mentioned the 12 tribes plus the 12 apostles. You've seen that. I'm sure most of you have seen that interpretation. Those 24 elders represent the 12 tribes and the 24 elders. Another interpretation of who those elders were sitting there, the priests, uh, Joseph, no, I'm sorry, David had organized the priests in his kingdom to put some order on how the priest had to deal with the temple. David had ordered, and at that point it wasn't the temple, it was the tabernacle. Remember, because they had the tabernacle with them. So God's place, God's holy abode here was the tabernacle, the tent that they carried through the wilderness. And the priest had to take care of that tent because they had to take it down, put it back up. So David organized the priests into 12 or 24 courses during the year so that all the priests weren't working all the time. They came in shifts, and each priest worked a couple of weeks per year doing the labor of the uptake of the temple and all the accoutrements in the temple, in the tabernacle. So that's one interpretation of the 24 seats. The 24 elders were representing the 24 courses of the priests that took care of the temple. I've got I'm not married to either one of those, but they're both I think equally strong. We'll find out later. So the now we've got the throne, the jewels, the 24 seats, and then thrones from flashes of lightning, rumbles, peals of thunder, uh, and before the throne were seven burning torches of fire, which we are told are the seven spirits of God. Does that description, from the throne came flashes of lightning, rumbles, and peals of thunder, Have you you remember that from somewhere else? We've heard that before. Where have we heard that kind of description before? You remember? I'm going to take that time to find it. That's the same kind of description we heard when the Lord, the Most High God, came down on Mount Sinai. And that's Exodus 19 and verse 16. This is when Moses is they've crossed the Red Sea, the starting of chapter 19, on the third new moon after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt. On that day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. So they have left Egypt and they are on their way through the wilderness. And on the 16th verse it said, on the morning of the third day there were thunders and lightnings and thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. This is, if we had any doubt of who this is sitting on that jasper and carnelian throne with rubies around it, this dispels any kind of doubt that you've got. Lightning pealing, this is God announcing himself here. So there is no question that this is the presence of God here before us. And we've got the seven spirits of God as those seven torches, and before the throne there was a sea of glass like crystal. This puts us back into the tabernacle, because if the temple itself, because in Solomon's time and in Herod's time there was in front in the most holy, not the most holy, the holy place, there was a very large bronze, basically a swimming pool. It was a bronze mikveh, huge bronze mikveh there in the front. And this is where the priests, in performing the sacrifices and performing the duties of keeping the temple upkeep and clean, got their garments, which are white, got their garments dirty and got themselves dirty. That mikvah in front, mikvah is the Hebrew for a baptismal font. The priest dipped in this massive sea in front of the most holy place, and that's where they did their ritual cleaning to clean themselves from the dirt that they accumulated dealing with the temple. So this is, and it's described in the Old Testament as like a sea of crystal. So John now is seeing a very familiar scene right here before the throne in heaven, this sea of glass, probably representing this large mikveh in front of the temple. So we've got some very familiar things that all the Jews are recognizing now, that this is God himself on his holy throne in heaven, and they're looking at things that they recognize now. So John is seeing things that he knows what he's looking at. And we'll go ahead, we've got a few minutes here. We'll go ahead and take a look at more of what John sees. So he's just seen this sea of glass in front and recognized that. And around the throne, on each side of the throne, were four living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind. The first living creature was like a lion. the second living creature like an ox, the third living creature the face of a man, and the fourth living creature was like an eagle in flight. And the four living creatures, each one of them with wings, are full of eyes all around, within, uh, all around and within, and day and night they never cease to say, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was, who is, and who is coming. Now, your translation might say is to come. The proper Greek there is who who was and who is coming. We've corrected that little misinterpretation several times in Daniel and here. So who was, who is, and who is coming. And whenever the living creatures gave glory and honor and thanks to him who is seated on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fell down before him who is seated on the throne, and worshipped him who lives forever and ever. They cast their crowns before the throne, saying, Worthy are you, O Lord our God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. So these four living creatures who had the um, was like a lion, an ox, and an eagle, and the face of a man. So these were four creatures, and we think of them that they look like each one of these, but when we're going to get a little further on, we're going to find out that these living creatures actually had four faces. They had, and this can get, and the Bible criticizers will say, well, see, these four guardians here are different. Well, they're not different. If you think about it, if they had four faces, the face of an eagle and an ox and a man and a lion, if they had those four faces so that they are always looking out, remember they've got eyes everywhere, they're always looking out. If they've got those four faces and John is standing there in front, he's going to see this one's eagle face, that one over there is lion face because he's looking that way. The one back here is looking this way, so he's going to see the ox on the end. So it's not a problem. It's the fact that John was seeing each one of the throne guardians faces a different direction, so he's seeing the face that's facing him. So there's no issue there with it. And also, um, so these were the cherubim, the throne guardians that are always around and near the throne of God, and we're going to see them again later on here. The 24 elders fall down on their face and worship God. Worthy are you, Lord our God, to receive honor and glory and power. This is nothing but just a rush of the majesty that John is standing there in front of in the throne room of God. So it had to have been just breathtaking to him to see these 24 elders worshiping God as God should be worshiped, and the throne guardians saying what they always say, glory, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. So this is a typical prophet's introduction to standing before the throne of God and being initiated as a prophet. So John, at this point, if he had any doubt at all, he knows I am now I have the responsibility of a prophet because I have been before the throne of the Almighty God. So, end of chapter 4. We're almost at the end of the time. Any questions that you got on what we went over, John's vision, this part of it? We'll start with chapter 5 next week unless we've got questions on chapter 4. Anything before we break up?
The greatest mystery to me is what are the seven eyes or the seven spirits of God? I cannot find that anywhere in the Bible other than where it's mentioned. I can't figure out what they are and what they do other than
That is a
to
that
and
is a
fro to
tough
the
one.
earth.
That is a very that's one of those mysteries that, yeah, we're gonna have to wait on that one.
Yeah, wait till we get there.
Yeah, because I'm like you, Jeff. I don't have even a good guess.
Yeah, it just blows my mind. And they go to and fro on the earth, and they bring only answer to God. That one just blows my mind.
Yeah. So there are things like that that we're going to run up against, and I don't even, like I said, I don't even have a good guess. I really, really don't. So anybody can come up with a good guess by next week. Bring it. Otherwise, you guys have a good weekend coming up, and let's not let the pollen get us down.
God bless everybody.
Okay.
Thank you,
Have a
everybody.
great evening, guys.
Goodbye. Good
Have
night.
a good
Good
weekend.
night. Good night.